broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of WilmsFront. It is Friday the 18th of October 2019. It is 7 p.m. Here in Melbourne. We are live on YouTube and also the YouTube enhancement software Entropy, where you can send through questions and you can also send through super chats throughout the evening. Now, the topic that's been in the news this week is Australia's current drought. Scott Morrison has faced pressure from all sides of politics, including his own, to better assist farmers who are struggling during this time. Australia's dirt and soil, it's always been tough for agriculturists. We've long been called the land of drought and flooding rains, but this current drought is not simply due to what is called cyclical rainfall deficiency, or even more absurdly due to climate change. This is actually a man-made drought caused by government policy and bureaucratic mismanagement. So it stems back from the 2007 Federal Water Act and the Murray Darling Basin Plan. A dissenting voice to these policies at the time, who we need to listen to more than ever now, is Ron Pike. He's a water consultant and a third-generation irrigation farmer. He's made countless radio and alt media appearances, including on my colleague Steele Archer's Detonation program. He's also written for Quadrant Online. I'm pleased to speak with him tonight, so myself and the rest of you can learn the truth about this current drought. Ron, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Delighted to be with you.
Now, the Murray Darling Basin, it's talked about in the news, well, not just this week, but all throughout the year. This has been an accumulation of scrutiny on the mismanagement of the basin. But for those who don't know what is the actual Murray Darling Basin, I'm just going to show them a map. So it's a system of rivers, and it goes through 4 states, so Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia. So it's a very important river system for our farmers on the southeast coast.
Yes, that is correct, Tim. It is one of the biggest drainage systems in the world. All of those rivers flow through some of the most fertile farming land in the world. And the great thing about that is the whole system, the whole 1 million square kilometres of it, is in a Mediterranean climate, and that is what makes it ideal for the growing of basic food crops. And it's why, up until recently, that whole area was not just Australia's food bowl, it was a food bowl for over 40 million people. And look what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. It's gone from a food bowl that people came from all over the world to look at, totally vertically integrated industries that produced top quality food and delivered it straight onto the supermarket shelves, not only of Australia, but of a much larger area across Asia. In the last 3 years, that has all been almost destroyed. It is a crime against humanity. It is a crime against the people of Australia. And the politicians that are allowing it to continue are an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, it's a national tragedy for sure. And well, ever since European settlement happened, farmers have been there generation to generation. Parents handed their farms over to the children, but we're seeing increasingly, especially in this social media age, teary farmers making videos on Facebook just saying we have to end this generations old family tradition, and it just breaks your heart.
Look, it's shocking what's happened. Australia is not short of water. I have been through this many times. There's 290 million megalitres of water runs off the Australian continent every year. Of that, we use less than 3%. The claim that the Murray system is overcommitted is the greatest load of rubbish that was ever put up. And of course, who fostered it? Malcolm Turnbull. People don't understand that the Murray River is still the biggest river in Australia when it comes to the quantum of water delivered to the sea. People talk about the Clarence and the other Burdekin rivers up north. The Murray delivers more than double the water of the Clarence to the sea every year. And what have we got at the moment? From southern Queensland all the way through to southern Victoria, we have farmers with no water for irrigated cropping. And yet, while that's happening, there's something in the order of 30 or 40,000 megalitres of water every single day running into the sea out the mouth of the Murray. Now, the mouth of the Murray, by the way, is not where the Murray Darling Basin Authority claim it to be. The mouth of the Murray is at Wellington, where it's been for the last several thousand years and likely to be for the next several thousand years. What they're talking about keeping open is an estuarine opening to the sea, and whether it's open or closed or half closed is irrelevant to anything. But what are we doing? We are wasting 7 to 8 million megalitres of fresh water every year, according to the Murray Darling Basin, to keep the mouth of the Murray open. It is a scandal beyond belief.
You mentioned Malcolm Turnbull then. Obviously, people only remember his recent stint as Prime Minister, but his first episode of grave political mismanagement was when John Howard made him Assistant Minister for Water, and then he became Environment and Water Minister. And that was during the 2000s drought, when probably climate change was at its peak hysteria. People think that the climate Extinction Rebellion protesters are being hysterical, but they're actually alienating most of the public. But around 2006, 2007 is when I'd say the majority of the population believed that irreversible climate change was here, and the drought was an indication of that. And also, Malcolm Turnbull, he called himself an environmentalist. He was an adherent of the climate change, man-made climate change belief. So it was a perfect storm for this. We'd call it allegedly for the Environment Water Act and Murray Darling Basin Plan.
With respect, Tim, I don't agree with any of that. I don't believe the average person in Australia thought that at all. The Australian people since 1788 have dealt with drought, and we're all well aware that Australia is a land of drought and flooding rains. And if we look at the Bureau of Meteorology history of rainfall in southern Australia, what we find is it is actually going up. That took a bit of a dent in the Millennium drought. But look, what I would like to do before we go any further is sort out this nonsense about the current drought versus the Millennium drought. The Millennium drought lasted for 11 years, from 1999 to 2010. During that 11 years, none of our dams ran empty, none of our rivers were dry. We maintained water for the whole length of all of our rivers in sufficient volume to supply all stock and domestic and municipal needs. We had sufficient water to keep all of our permanent plantings, that's fruit trees, grapevines and the like, alive. At the end of that drought, there was still sufficient water in storage that even if it didn't rain for another 3 years, no one would have run out of water. Compare that to what's happened this time. With the exception of a little bit of area in Queensland that has been in drought for 6 or 7 years, and I want to stress that that area is not really in the catchment of the Murray Darling Basin. And I also want to stress this. Of all the catchment of the Murray Darling Basin, what comes out of Queensland is less than 4%. So it's pretty much irrelevant. This drought is only 1.5 years old, and in the southern Murray Darling Basin, it's not even in drought yet. And yet here we have 5 empty dams, we have 6 dry rivers, we have municipalities serious municipalities with no running water. All of the permanent plantings along the Darling and around Millennium lakes, and this is where we used to produce some of our prime table grapes, our early cherries, our early apricots, they are all dead. Now, this has happened in 1.5 years of drought. So what's the difference between the Millennium drought, which lasted for 11 years, and this drought, which is only 1.5 years old? The difference is the Murray Darling Basin Plan has come into place, and all of our water has been squandered to the sea by clowns who couldn't run a bathtub, let alone manage the Murray Darling Basin. It is an absolute disgrace that the politicians of this country, both federal and New South Wales, are allowing this to continue. And I can absolutely guarantee you that unless they fix it in the next couple of weeks, they will be swept from office with an absolute passion.
And that was also the beginning of the attacks on well, it was an attack on farmers, the Water Act and the Murray Darling Basin Plan, because there were allegations of overuse, and that needed to be policed, and it also took away the water rights from the farmers themselves, and created. I've researched this, and it's still difficult to understand the water market that's being created now. It's almost like a speculative stock market now.
It's not a water market, it's a contrived system designed for speculators and profiteers to make a profit on a commodity that should never ever be treated as a commodity. The right to water, or the people's right to water, was established in Magna Carta 800 years ago. It's enshrined in Section 100 of the Australian Constitution. Malcolm Turnbull blatantly sidestepped Section 100 of the Australian Constitution, and on that grounds alone, the Federal Water Act should be repealed tomorrow. What happened when he did that is the basis of this whole problem. For the first time ever, we broke the nexus between a licence to irrigate and land that could be irrigated. And when you stop and think about it, what other purpose is there for a licence to irrigate? It is a licence to irrigate land that can be irrigated. Now, once you break that nexus, you create a situation where people can buy so-called water rights, they can store them, and they can play the so-called market with it, which is what's happening at the moment, and farmers can't afford to buy water. But the worst thing of the whole lot when they did that, the biggest holder of water rights in Australia at the moment is the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder. Now, I ask you, what are they doing with that water? I can tell you, they are flushing it to the sea to waste. Now, since when has the environment, in inverted commas, uniquely existed down the mouth of the Murray? Now, some of that water has been diverted onto red gum forests. That is the most stupid thing you could ever possibly imagine. Red gums are flood tolerant. They're not flood dependent. They never have been. I can take you and show you vast areas of river red gums that have never seen a flood. And for the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder to be artificially watering red gums, as they are at the moment, when we are in a drought and the people have no water to produce crops, once again, it is a crime against the people. And I've had numerous correspondence with David Littleproud over the last 7 or 8 weeks, and I commend him for at least answering my correspondence. But I will not comment here on the veracity of the answers. We have a minister who is totally out of his depth, pun intended, when it comes to water. And unless the Federal Water Act is repealed and replaced with the plan that I have with the Prime Minister at the moment, I don't know what's going to happen. But what I do know is all of those communities that I call my birthplace and homeland, and all of those communities that have produced our food over the last 100 years, they're all going to be dead by the new year. They can't exist for another year of no crop production. And you might ask, well, you might say, well, there's no water left there. Well, I'm sorry, there is. There's no water left in the Darling system, and we can't fix that until it rains again. But there's considerable amounts of water left in the Lachlan, the Murrumbidgee, the Murray and the Goulburn rivers, which are the heart of the food bowl. But what's the government doing with it? It's flushing it to the sea, for goodness sake. Now, if I cannot get a positive response from Prime Minister Morrison in the next few days, I won't only be on this program, I'll be on Alan Jones and a number of others and be calling for his resignation, because you can't put yourself in the position of being Prime Minister and then totally disregard the rights of your constituents. And there's no greater right that the people have than the right to a consistent supply of water, power and gas. And this government has denied them that.
I think Alan Jones would probably agree with you if you made that call. I mean, he had a fiery interview with Scott Morrison earlier in the week, where it seemed that Scott Morrison was just repeating the talking points. He'd rehearsed them, and people think of Alan Jones as just a Liberal cheerleader. But if they're not doing the right thing by any group of people, especially the farmers, he'll go at them. I mean, his biggest target over the past decade was the LNP Premier, Campbell Newman, and so he's been hammering this all throughout the week. And it's important that, because it's been the Liberal National Coalition that's been in the federal government, from, like, there was Labor in charge basically beginning of 2008 to 2013, but we've had the National Party hold the agriculture and water portfolio, Barnaby Joyce, and then David Littleproud, and now Agriculture Minister is Bridget McKenzie. So they can't just blame the inner city lefty environmentalist greenies. They've been at the helm.
Now, the National Party have become not the party of regional Australia, they've become the party of let's look after my job by cozying up to the city Liberals because they've got the power. And that, again, is a disgrace. We have a Deputy Prime Minister at the moment who I know very, very well. I've known him for 20-odd years. I'll quite happily say right here and now, he is an absolute fraud when it comes to representing regional Australia. He's a closet greenie. And he's up there saying, oh, we're going to build dams in New South Wales. He said it about 5 or 6 times in the last few days. Guess what? It's a straight out lie. They are building no dams in New South Wales. They are rebuilding one that exists, and they're raising the wall height on Wyangla Dam. And as I quite succinctly said the other day, if you had a list of water infrastructure projects that are needed in New South Wales, the raising of the dam wall on Wyangla would be about number 53. It's certainly not in the first 2 or 3. Now, we've got the similar thing, and I saw Melinda Pavey trying to airbrush her brilliant political career on Channel 10 about an hour ago. Sydney's going to run out of water if this drought continues. Are they doing anything about that? No, nothing. Melinda Pavey's out there saying, oh, what a wonderful job they're doing. The people are using less water in Sydney. Well, I got news for you, Melinda. They're still going to use water. We're down to 1 million megalitres left in the dam. And if the drought continues for another 2 years, where's Sydney going to get its drinking water from? The plans for Sydney's future water we put to the government 6 years ago. It hasn't been acted on. And until it's acted on, Sydney is in, or could be, in real trouble.
But that's another trend over the past, 15 years, where we had during the 2000s wall-to-war Labor state governments, and they all agreed with the environmental activists that we shouldn't build new dams and that we should instead build desalination plants, which cost billions of dollars. And if we're trying to fight climate change and conserve energy, they're some of the biggest energy consumers, desalination plants of any sort of type of plant or factory.
Look, the bottom line, Tim, is this. Bob Carr correctly described it. He did a fact-finding tour to the Middle East when he was Premier, looking at desalination. When he came home, he got off the plane, he held a press conference, and he said, I've come to the conclusion that desalinated water is simply bottled electricity. Bob Carr said that. He was absolutely correct. Now, if Sydney has to crank up the desalination plant sometime in the next 12 months or so, guess what? There's not going to be enough power to run the thing. We already have Snowy Hydro almost empty. It's down to under 30%. Luckily, there's been a good snow season and there's a bit of run-in at the moment. But the only way we keep the lights on in Sydney and Melbourne every evening from 4:30 till about 11 o'clock is to run all of those hydroelectric generators at full blast. What's that doing? It's emptying the system of water. Under the agreement with Snowy Hydro and the states, Snowy Hydro is supposed to deliver approximately 1.1 million megalitres a year into the Murrumbidgee and 1.1 million megalitres a year into the Murray. Have a guess how much water's left in the whole system? About 1.2 million megalitres. Guess where there's going to be no water this summer? It won't be coming out of Snowy Hydro, and if it's not coming out of Snowy Hydro, you know what's going to happen? The lights will go out in Sydney and Melbourne. And what have we got? We've got government ministers who have been made aware of this, and they just sit there on their hands and no decisions to fix this are being made. And if you think it's a difficult place to be, being Prime Minister and a senior minister, when people run out of water, how bad's it going to be when they run out of water and power as well? I wouldn't like to be in Parliament, frankly.
Yes, water and power, they go hand in hand. I mean, farmers, they need both access to cheap and efficient electricity and water as well to grow their crop or feed their cattle, whatever type of farming they're in. And so the energy crisis is linked to the water crisis as well.
Absolutely agree. If you read my work, I've been saying this now for 6 or 7 years. It's what I call the tools of trade of production. And it matters not whether it's primary production or secondary production or manufacturing industry. Every producer has to have power, water, gas and fuel. The fifth one, of course, is labour. Well, we're not short of labour. But both state and federal governments have made those basic inputs of production scarce, expensive, and priced our wonderful adaptive and productive producers, they've priced them out of business. And a classic example, and I applaud what both Alan Jones and Pauline Hanson have had to say about the dairy industry, but I also would like to alert them to this. It's not the price of milk that's put the dairy farmers out of business. It's the price of the inputs to produce that milk that's put them out of business. When you've got to pay $400 or $500 or $600 or $700 a megalitre for water, when you've got the dearest electricity in the world, and we now have, and gas, we're the second biggest gas producer in the world, but we've got the highest gas prices in the world. Now, surely someone should get hold of both the Minister and the Prime Minister by the scruff of the neck and say, how can you justify this nonsense? Because that's what's putting dairy farmers out of business. The washed potato industry in southern Australia is already gone, and it's gone for the same reason. The corn industry is gone, and I used to be part of that industry and very proud producer of corn that's used in all of our processed foods. The rice industry in Australia was the most productive and efficient rice industry in the world, and it was that way for over 60 years. My paternal grandfather was one of 5 or 6 people that grew the first production of rice in Australia. We used to produce 1.5 million tonnes of paddy rice a year. You know how much we produced last year? 50,000 tonnes. Can you imagine how many people have been put out of work as a result of that? And yet we've got a Prime Minister sitting there, we've got a Minister for Water, David Littleproud, sitting there saying, oh, we have to let this Murray Darling Basin Plan continue. You know, it's going to do the right thing one day. Well, I'm sorry, guys. It's blatantly obvious it hasn't succeeded. It's wrecked the whole economy, and there's no water left. So guess what? Either it goes or you guys go. It's pretty simple.
Still, all the conversation this week is about drought assistance, because there's been drought assistance for over a decade. There was another drought in the early 2010s, but now there's going to be because it's $250 a week, it's been quoted, the drought assistance, but now Scott Morrison is issuing a $13,000 lump sum. But no, they're not talking about what you're talking about. They haven't mentioned we're going to review the Murray Darling Basin Plan. Scott Morrison's talked about an ACCC investigation into the water market, which doesn't report until well into 2020, which there's not enough time.
Morrison will be gone long before then unless he corrects this. He's really only got 2 weeks to fix this. I have put on his desk the plan that will fix it, and I'll come back to the drought assistance in a minute. There is no other way. We can manage our water in a fashion where everyone can have all the water they need, and the environment, which I very quickly would like to point out, the Murray Darling Basin Authority have never defined where it is or where it resides or what it is or anything. They just assume that flushing water down the Murray to the sea is somehow beneficial to the environment. Now back to drought assistance. Once you get to the stage where we are now, where we have a large section of Australia in drought and nothing's been done before, there's really nothing the government can do other than hand out money. It can hand out money to keep people in food and supplies. It can hand out money to some extent to buy feed for livestock. But what you need to remember is by the time an official drought declaration is made, most of the reserves of fodder have been already used, because no one can ever tell us when a dry spell becomes a drought until afterwards. With the hindsight of history, we can say, oh yeah, that dry spell became a drought back in April last year. So there's nothing Morrison can do, and I certainly don't blame him for this, probably contrary to Alan Jones, who's I consider a mate of mine, other than hand out money. But the plan that I put to the government, I put it recently to this government, I put it to the government when the drought broke in 2010. We can drought-proof the whole of Australia, and it's got 2 arms. The first arm is water. We have to conserve water in Australia in every single valley in the country, and I mean every valley. Every valley goes through periods of vast floods, which cause a lot of damage, and they are invariably followed by periods when there's no flow. So how simple is it to build some water storage, avoid the damage of floods, and ensure that people in the whole valley have got water for right through the dry periods? The second thing we have to do, we have to set up a national drought fodder reserve. Initially, the government would have to put up some money for that. We establish those drought fodder reserves at existing grain storage facilities, which you see all over regional Australia, wherever we produce grain. The government would need to build some new silos and some new hay sheds. But we stock that drought reserve in years of plenty. The Egyptians taught us this 3,000 years ago. You don't go out and try and buy the fodder, which is what's happening now, during the drought. You buy the fodder and store it in times of plenty. Now, when we have big grain years, that's winter grain crop years, it often happens that come harvest time, you'll get thunderstorms or something, and a lot of the crop gets downgraded to feed grade. And people have trouble selling it. That is the grain that the government buys to establish this stock fodder reserve. But it won't cost the government any money at all once it's established, because what we would do is put a livestock levy per head across every head of livestock in the country. And it wouldn't be much, it'd be very little. And that would perpetuate the maintaining of that fodder reserve. Farmers could not get access to it while there was a dry spell on. They'd still be responsible for maintaining their own hay and grain reserves. But once a drought was declared, they could get access to that fodder at no cost. And that's the biggest problem in a drought. By the time the farmer needs reserves of fodder, he's got no money. He's got no income. By doing it this way, he doesn't need an income. It's already been paid for. It was paid for through the good years. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'm sure you've tabled this to the ministers and other people that you've met. And so they've got this in front of them, but they're still business as usual.
That's why I'm so depressed at the moment. It's the problems we face in Australia. The upside is they're fixable.
Yes.
We're the most resource-rich country in the world. So why in the hell have we got the dearest power in the world? Why are we short of water? I've just demonstrated. We don't use 3% of our available water resources. And that's without mentioning, by the way, groundwater. We have more groundwater in Australia than most other countries on earth. And down where I come from in the Western Riverina and the Murrumbidgee Valley is the biggest potable water aquifer in the world. It is 2 billion, these are not my figures, this is New South Wales Office of Water figures, 2 billion megalitres of water there. Now here we are in a drought with the New South Wales Office of Water saying, oh, you can't use that water. Oh no, you can't use that. We are currently governed by and managed by a governing class that are only interested in their own future, and they are not operating in the interests of the Australian people. And frankly, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we should cast most of them into the river.
They've basically socialised the water in Australia. You mentioned that it's the federal government that now owns most of the water, and anyone who knows the history of socialism and communism, when the government's in charge of something, it's centrally controlled, then there's mismanagement and there's rationing as well. And if you're accused of hoarding or stealing water, then they come after you, the government. There's something called the Northern Basin Commissioner, whose job it is to police overuse, which is Mick Kelty at the moment, who used to be the Australian Federal Police Commissioner. So that shows you that how sort of making sure that nobody goes over their allocation, because rationing it happens in communist countries.
Look, it's a totalitarian state we live in New South Wales, and it's time the people rose up and said, we're not going to cop this anymore. I'll give you an example of just how bad it's got, and it relates to water. When the state decided to build Burrinjuck Dam, which was in the middle of the Federation drought in 1898. They didn't start building it until 4 or 5 years later. But they very correctly went ahead and said, well, right, if we're going to build this dam, we then have to organise how we use the water. They built Berrumbed Weir, they dug the main canal, and they bought Sir Samuel Macacky's North Yanko. The organisation that was set up to do all of that, and it was set up in 1914, no, sorry, before then. Anyway, it doesn't matter, about 1910, was the New South Wales Water Conservation and Irrigation Commission, warmly known as the WC&IC. That one bureaucracy ran all the water in New South Wales for well over 90 years. They built dams, they built weirs, they dug channels, they supplied water to Sydney and supplied water to everybody. There was one organisation. In the last few years, we've gone from one bureaucracy managing water for the whole of the state to anything up to 7 or 8 bureaucracies in every single valley. Have you got that?
Yes.
The number of bureaucracies is in the, I don't know, it's in the dozens and dozens and dozens. All of those bureaucracies are employing people who expect to get paid from the sale of a dwindling amount of water because they're wasting it. And so why do you think there's problems out there? If we took the machete to 3/4 of the bureaucrats managing water in New South Wales, two things would happen. The first is the management of water would improve overnight. And the second thing is there'd be plenty of water for the people. It's ludicrous what's going on.
You wonder, with all those bureaucrats and the billions that has been spent on managing the Murray Darling Basin, where's all the money going? What are all those bureaucrats doing? What do they do from 9 to 5 other than making sure that farmers don't get water? But I want to just touch on briefly, because you've talked about how a lot of this water that's in the basin is being flushed out to ocean in form of environmental flows. Can you explain if there is any logic behind it, and also the rationale behind not building any new dams as well?
Look, the answer to the first question is it's nothing more than bloody-minded stupidity. There is no environmental advantage in putting more water down a river than is required to maintain all of stream flow in sufficient quantity to meet extraction amounts. And those extraction amounts are for stock of domestic and municipalities and permanent plantings. And if there's any left over, we give an allocation to annual croppers. That's how we managed the system for 90 odd years, and we got it right. There is no such thing as an environmental flow the way we've seen down the Murray now for the last 9 months. On average, there has been 12 to 14,000 megalitres of water released out of Hume Dam every single day into an already swollen river with runoff from the snowmelt. All of that water has gone to the sea to waste. And the authorities have, for the last 3 or 4 years, very, very falsely and deceptively changed the way they report the river flows downriver. I can assure you, if you go onto the website of South Australian Water, you will see there the amount of water flowing through each of the weirs down through South Australia. All of those volumetric figures that appear every week are fabricated. Why are they fabricated? Because they are embarrassed, or would be embarrassed, if it was shown the real amount of water that's just flowing out to sea. And I repeat right where we started out. This either has to stop within the next 2 weeks, or the Morrison government, the New South Wales government, and probably the Victorian government are going to be washed away with the reaction of what's happened. And once again, pun intended.
It's just so unbelievable that there's been successful agricultural production in the Australian continent for 200 years, and in just the 21st century, it's just been completely ruined just because of ideological stupidity, as you call it, adherence to quacko theories. How it's just all been, and yeah, you saw Alan Jones tear up on Sky News on Tuesday night. Just listening to you, I'm getting quite emotional because it's just, how could this happen? And Peter Credlin, who he hosts his Sky News show with, she's the daughter of a dairy farmer as well, so it's close to home, sir, as well. And we also saw Pauline Hanson tear up on 2GB with Ellen Jones this morning, because it's the dairy farmers. They're another one that's struggling. Her idea is to re-regulate the dairy industry. That's also what Bob Katter, the independent member for Kennedy, has been lobbying for. And it's all related to this the price of milk wars, because the major supermarkets, they introduced $1 litre of milk. It's slowly gone back up, and it's obviously people are wanting more to go back to the dairy farmers. But what's the guts of that problem? Is it what was the deregulation of the dairy industry?
Look, there was no problem with the deregulation of the dairy industry. There would still be no problem with the dairy industry if, as I said earlier, we can argue that, the supermarkets and that drive a hard bargain for milk, but it's actually not the supermarkets, it's the processors that set the price of milk that farmers get. Of course, they've got to deal with the end user, which is the supermarkets. But the problem with the dairy industry is, and I did mention this earlier, it's not the price of milk, it's the price of the inputs of production. And once you get water at hundreds of dollars a megalitre, when for the last, ever since we've had volumetric allocations, the price per megalitre of water for broadacre irrigation is usually $30 to $35. Once that goes from $35 to $4 or $5 or $6 or $7 or $800, how can a dairy farmer exist? Now, while that's been going on, his power bill that used to be $400 or $500 a month is now $5,000 or $10,000 a month. His power bill. If he uses gas, which quite a lot of them do, we've got the dearest gas in the world. And do not lose sight of the fact how important this is. The whole of Australia runs on diesel fuel. Outside of a few electric trains in the centre of the major cities, all of our transport, all of our agriculture, all of our fishing, all of our forestry, all of our mining, it runs on diesel. Guess what? We don't even produce diesel in this country anymore. We are on a short fuse where if a boat got turned around or sunk or something in between here and Asia, we would run out of fuel in less than a week. We have all these vast reserves of brown coal and, coal that's probably not first quality, out of which we can produce diesel. We should have started that program 25 years ago. But here we are today in 2019 with something like a week's supply of diesel. Can you imagine what's going to happen if we ran out of diesel, in view of what I've just said? Now, that also affects the dairy industry, because dairy farmers, like every other farmer, all their tractors run on diesel. And I just go back to the point, both our federal and our state governments have let the people down. They both need to take stock of what their job is, and their job is looking after the Australian people. It's not grandstanding behind the footlights of the world stage. Come home, stay in Australia, and start managing the country the way you should.
Yes, other experts in the area have talked about fuel security, how given that we are so dependent on overseas now, that we could potentially run out of fuel and energy. It's not just affecting the farming sector, but it's one of the reasons why we don't have a manufacturing industry anymore. That was most obvious with the closure of all the car manufacturers in Adelaide. Obviously, well, everyone in the supermarket still wants to buy local produce and products, but this is going to be the next thing that goes, and it'll definitely be more visible.
Tim, we've become, by the neglect of government in planning for the future, has resulted in an economy in Australia which is made up of bureaucracies and service industries. We no longer manufacture much at all, and it's underpinned, of course, by the mining industry. If it wasn't for mining industry payments to state governments in particular, they'd all be broke. And what it's got to is this. You can walk into any shopping centre anywhere in Australia, you can buy quite a good soy latte. You can buy something to eat to go with it. But guess what? We can't make the machine that makes the soy latte. We don't even make the refrigerator to keep the milk cold anymore. Would you believe we import refrigerators from New Zealand?
Yeah, I can believe that.
Now, who would have ever thought, I'll accept that the Kiwis can always beat us at rugby, but I don't accept that they should beat us at every other thing. And I've got a very warm spot for the Kiwis, by the way, but our whole economy is on the verge of collapse. We are headed into probably the deepest recession that Australia has ever seen, and the result of that is going to be a dramatic drop in the standard of living for every Australian. Now, that's not where we want to go, but I'm sorry, Prime Minister, and I'm sorry, Treasurer Frydenberg, that is where you have taken us. And I go back to what I said. You've taken us there because you've taken away from the people the tools of trade. Now, if you fix that, we might even avoid this recession, but if you don't, that's where we're headed.
The urbanisation of Australia, that hasn't helped the voice of the farmers, and that's why the Liberals and Nationals, even though they talk a big game about, of course, we respect the farmers, you've just exposed how they've neglected them. But the people in the bush, they still do have an electoral voice. And New South Wales, where the drought is at its most desperate level, they've in southern New South Wales, in the seats which take in the Murray Darling Basin, they've started to elect Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party MPs. Probably one of the best voices on the Murray Darling mismanagement is Helen Dalton. She's the member for Murray. There's also Roy Butler, the member for Barwon. There's three Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party MPs in the lower house. There's two rural independents. That hasn't been replicated at a federal level yet, but there is a bush revolt happening.
Look, absolutely, and I'd just like to note Helen Dalton made her decision to enter politics sitting alongside her husband Nace at a table about 10 feet from where I am now.
Oh, wow.
So I've known Helen Dalton for a great deal of time. She is like a breath of fresh air in the New South Wales Parliament. She is doing a wonderful job, as are the other SFF members. But I'd like to point out here as well the effort being put in by Rod Roberts from One Nation in the upper house and his colleague Mark Latham. Absolutely excellent and to be applauded. And there is absolutely no doubt that come the next federal election, there will be serious people standing against the likes of Susan Lee, the likes of Michael McCormick and Barnaby Joyce. If Barnaby Joyce gets back into Parliament again, all the people are absolutely bloody mad. both he and McCormick have been frauds to regional Australia. Neither of them have ever had one sentence of vision or no idea about what is needed to make regional Australia productive again. And all they've done is supported all the things that have made it unproductive. Barnaby Joyce stood up there on the Murrumbidgee, banks of the Murrumbidgee alongside Gajildri Weir about 4 years ago. The Murrumbidgee River, which I lived on for a very large part of my life, was running at about 120,000 megalitres a day. In other words, running a bank or running over the banks. There was floods. And here's what Barnaby Joyce said. It's absolutely essential that we implement the Murray Darling Basin Plan and return water to the environment. And of course, the people just booed. Here was this idiot standing alongside a flooded river demanding that we return more water to a flooded river. Like, you know. No.
And as I pointed out on the map, South Australia has part of the Murray Darling Basin, and the attention to how the mismanagement is affecting that state, it's come from what some people would think unlikely sources. The Centre Alliance, when Nick Xenophon was in federal and state parliament, he gave a lot of attention to this issue, and even the Greens' Sarah Hanson-Young.
Look, South Australia has never been short of water, never, and never ever will be, because the multi-state agreement that was put in place in 1914 is still the predominant agreement managing the Murray River. And that agreement quite simply states that the first priority for water in the Murray will be to maintain all of river flow in sufficient volume to ensure that South Australia gets a minimum of 1,850,000 megalitres a year every year, and there's a little proviso, except in exceptional circumstances. In 104 years, those exceptional circumstances were brought into play once, which was in 2007, but they were never ever met. In 2007, the worst year of the Millennium drought, South Australia still got 2,400,000 megalitres of water. So the claim that South Australia has somehow been denied water is a lie.
Well, there you go there. But of course, it seems that South Australia, it's a state. Well, it's been self-inflicted. Its economic decline. So you can probably say there that Centre Alliance and Sarah Hanson-Young, they're more motivated by interest in their state, which, well, we're a federation, so I guess you can't blame them for that.
Well, you know, if you're going to run your state on the basis that the most important thing and the greatest moral issue is man-made climate change, well, of course you're going to end up looking foolish. You don't even have to think about that one.
Now, I want to talk about the real life impact that's happening in rural communities, because that's the unpleasant aspect to talk about. I've talked about rural flight, how the rural electorates are becoming much larger, and there's more seats in the city. But obviously, farmers, mental health. Again, Alan Jones, a lot of them have called in, and farmers are pretty tough, and to hear them, they don't break down easily. They're tough. It's tough being on the farm. That's how much it's affecting them. There's a knock on rural businesses as well. The person that runs the milk bar in the rural town, the hotel, everything's affected, and of course it'll eventually affect our food prices in the city and quality of food.
Tim, you're absolutely correct. The wonderful thing about the Australian food bowl as it was is that it was totally vertically integrated. The farmers produced the raw product. There were processors and manufacturers and so on that came into play. The product went on to either trains or semi-trailers, and it was delivered to supermarkets across Australia and in many cases to supermarkets in other parts of the world. All of that is now under threat. I get at least 1 or 2 phone calls a day, usually from people I do not know. They are often in tears. Some of them are women who are concerned about their menfolk. I had one the other day, and this is from a young gentleman I don't know. And you know what he said to me? He's on the Lachlan River, about 50 kilometres downstream of Forbes. And he said, Ron, the reason I'm ringing you is, he said, I've got nowhere else to turn, and I've watched you and listened to what you've had to say for some time. He said, my family has lived on this property for 160 years. He said, we're not big growers, but we're small irrigators. He grows some cotton every year, and he grows some alfalfa for hay. He said, I've educated my kids to university education, but he said, one of them wants to come home to the farm, and he said, I can't let him do it because he said, I cannot exist here any longer because after 160 years, when they deny me water, and this is what motivated the phone call, Wyangla Dam is down to 19%, which is only about 200,000 megalitres. He said, I've got no water allocation this year, but the Murray Darling Basin Authority are just releasing 28,000, in other words, more than 10% of the water in the dam, to water some gum trees down below me. Now, with tears in his eyes, or in his voice, he said, Ron, what can you do to help me? And all I could say to him was, mate, I'm doing everything I can, but I can't do any more. Now, I just want to follow that up with what I've been told from the people who are doing similar to what I'm doing down in the Murray. I am told that in the seat of Farrer in the last 12 months, there have been 34 suicides all by men. Now, some of them are made to look like accidents. In other words, they get on the motorbike and go tearing down the road at 100 mile an hour and run into a tree. That way the family gets the insurance and it's classed as an accident. But the people that are telling me this are telling me that there's been 34 suicides just in the seat of Farrer. Now, there's another young gentleman who I won't name, but he runs a suicide prevention network, in fact, in my old hometown. He rings me regularly. He said, Ron, it's become an absolute crisis. He said the number of men that don't know what to do, they don't want to walk off their farm, but without water they can't stay on their farm. And he said, I am concerned that we're going to see multiple suicides in the course of the next few months. Now, they're 2 phone calls that I've received in the last week. And I think that probably answers your question.
Yeah, that's gut-wrenching to hear that. And yeah, you've obviously got a lot of contempt for Susan Lee. Well, she's the Environment Minister now. She's back in. It sounds like that. Have you been able to get in contact with her? Because it seems that this is the electorate which is most affected by this.
I'll tell you a bit of history. I left the National Party in disgust a few years ago, and what I did, I hopped in the car and went down to the seat of Farrer and I stood against Susan Lee. So, yes, I know her very well. Needless to say, I didn't succeed, but I was that furious and wild then that I'm too old to do it again, but yeah, I threw my hat in the ring in 2016.
Oh, well, good on you for doing that. Now, whenever there's a scandalous mismanagement of something by government, there's calls for a royal commission. Four Corners, they did an episode on the Murray Darling Basin. It seems that a Four Corners episode, the automatic reaction to that is to hold a royal commission. But all that is just presenting evidence. And we've had several royal commissions in the past few years, and there's hardly been any... not many recommendations taken up, or a lot of the recommendations have been wrong. It just seems to just be a venting exercise, which it does expose to the public what's going on. But you've already talked about, you've got the solutions. Why do we need a royal commission, which is going to take up more taxpayers' money to basically say in hearings what you and I both already know?
Tim, we've had this, it's ironic in one way you're bringing this up tonight, because there's been a very, very, I won't say heated, but a very robust discussion about a Royal Commission in social media today. In summary, and I think this was ultimately accepted by most people, the calling of a Royal Commission into the Murray Darling Basin Plan now is strictly a waste of time, money and effort. Who do you think is going to draw up the terms of reference? Who's going to select the commissioners? The government and the Murray Darling Basin Authority, and all they're going to do is come up with something like what happened in the South Australian Royal Commission, which was only a few months ago, and they'll come out and say, oh no, the way to fix this is take more water off irrigators. Now, as you and I both know, those irrigators at the moment have got no water. So that's an absolute waste of time. And the issue, and I cannot stress this enough, the issue is now far, far more critical. If the government doesn't act and fix this in the next week or two, I can tell you what's going to happen. There will be civil unrest. There will be uprisings because, look, regional people, you may be able to bend them. You may be able to walk over them and pummel them into the ground. But I got news for Mr. Littleproud and Melinda Pathy and Scott Morrison. You will never break them. They're tougher than that. They're made of bloody good stuff, a lot better stuff than you bastards are made of. And they will rise up and destroy the government before they will allow everything that they and several generations have worked for to be destroyed by a mob of overpaid bloody bureaucrats who shouldn't be there. So, Mr. Morrison, start listening. And I just want to stress again, the plan to fix this is sitting on the Prime Minister's desk. It is a plan that doesn't proportion blame. It is a plan that seamlessly moves from that which is costing the government both money and credibility to a plan that will return money to government coffers and return the credibility to the government. I challenge the Prime Minister right here and now to talk to me, and let's start implementing this next week, because if we don't, as I said, those people that you are treading into the ground at the moment are stronger than you, and they will rise up and they will destroy you and your government.
And I think most of the people who've been watching tonight, myself, the solution is, or it's quite simple: free the water and trust the farmers to manage it like they always have.
They've managed it brilliantly for 100 years. Why would anything change? Like, no farmer, no matter who he is going to want to use water that isn't available, and no farmer's going to use water that will deny someone downstream water, in spite of what they're saying at the moment about the Darling River, providing the rules are in place the way they were for the last 100 years. And if you go online and look at my plan for the Darling River, it's very, very simple. That is the way every river valley in Australia should be managed. And if it's managed that way, we will never, ever be short of water again. The frustrating thing is the present management system is so bloody complex, so multi-layered, that it can't work. The solution is actually incredibly simple. And as I said to someone the other day, they said, oh yeah, but what about the science? And I said, what bloody science? Oh, well, you know, we've got to understand the science. And I said, well, I'll tell you how you understand it. You need a degree from a university in common sense. And then there's only three things you need to know. Water availability in Australia is highly variable. It runs downhill and it finds its own level. Now, how simple is that? They're the only three things you need to know to manage water. You don't need any science. You don't need any of this other nonsense. And anyway, the guy who said that too laughed. But I will defy anyone, and I don't care if it's the chief scientist from the Murray Darling Basin Authority, anybody else, to challenge me on that. Make my day, sunshine, because that's all we need to know to manage water properly. So, do we need to build more dams? Well, during the last 40 years, our population has nearly doubled, and we haven't built any more water storage. Every other populated continent on Earth has been building dams hand over fist. Excuse the expression, I don't like using cliches, but I'm using them tonight, my apologies. Except the continent that has the most unreliable rainfall. We're the only continent that hasn't built dams. I can't remember the figures, but I put them in a paper that went to the New South Wales government about 5 years ago. I think in that paper, I did some research and I found that the World Bank had financed over 500 major dams across the world in the last 5 or 6 years, something like that. Guess what? We haven't built one in Australia. None.
Yeah, which tells you plenty.
Yep. But
Now,
I'd just be sorry to interrupt him, but I just want to stress, I've got no idea who's listening to this or who will see it or whatever, but please understand, I'm being critical of management and politicians, and I'm well aware of that. But at the end of the day, this is very, very fixable. My job here is to help you fix it. I know I haven't been doing this for 50 years without having some knowledge about how the system works. And, if I was really truthful, the figure's actually 60 years. So I was the first person to officially use water from the Snowy Scheme in 1960. And as a result of that, Sir William Hudson invited me up to Cooma, and I spent a week as their guest in going around the scheme with my dad. And I've been involved in the management and politics of water ever since. And it's been a labour of great love and passion and gratitude. But it's also what makes me cry when I see the situation at the moment. It's just, but please, Prime Minister, just listen to us. We can fix it.
well, the people watching tonight, they've been in the live chat. They've certainly appreciated what you've got to say, and even if the Prime Minister's still not listening, you've still got to tell as many people as possible. Keep doing media articles, everything. Get the message out to as many people as possible, because as you talked about, revolt, that's the only thing that politicians are scared of. And I've appreciated you coming on tonight. If people want to get in contact with you or access your proposals, how can they do that?
Go onto my Facebook page is the easiest way. I'm always available to give people more detail as once I establish who they are and what they're about. I say here I have had over the last few years a number of people from within politics who have plagiarised some of our work, and I want to stress that the Australian Water Exploration Company, a not-for-profit company, have been responsible for doing a lot of the work that I put forward and propose. And it makes me absolutely bloody sick when I see some two-pit politician or political party plagiarise that work. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that we get those plans implemented, and hopefully we are much closer to that now, but when you see the Prime Minister and the New South Wales Premier and the Deputy Prime Minister struck the stage only 5 or 6 days ago and effectively lied their head off to the Australian people by saying, oh, we're building dams. I challenge them here tonight to name one dam they're building, because they're not. The whole thing was, it was just a charade. They're rebuilding the Dungowan Dam, which is an existing dam. They're increasing the height of Wyangla, which is a bit of a farce. They're not building any dams to make sure that Sydney water supply will be sufficient. Sydney's now a city of 5 million people, growing at 200,000 people a year. That necessitates the building of a Burrinjuck-sized dam every 7 or 8 years to keep water up to those people. Melinda Pavey will go down in history as probably the most incompetent water minister that New South Wales has ever seen, and believe me, that is a very big order, because we have had a run of incompetent water ministers, and you know, it's just, I just want to go back and say to the politicians, both state and federal, all of this is fixable. But
Yes.
it's sure as hell not fixable while ever you are pig-headed enough to think that you've got control, because you don't. You don't understand what you're talking about.
Well, I hope the politicians don't believe that the news cycle will simply move on next week and this will go away. I hope that that another thing's coming to them, and please, Ron, maintain the rage, because yeah, it's certainly been one of the more emotional episodes to me. I've grown up in the outer suburbs, but yeah, it's been a really it's really touched me, this episode.
Tim, I thank you for the opportunity. As you know, it's something that's very dear to my heart and has been all of my life. And yeah, I get very emotional these days, because I just can't sit idly by and watch people that I've known virtually from when they were born. I'll just give you another example, and I won't mention names, but this lady rang me yesterday. She has been a real toiler for water reform for 10 or 15 years. I know her and her husband. I've known them, their families before them. And here's what she said to me. She said, Ron, we are out. She said, for the first time in our lives, we can't pay our way. And she said, we can't pay our way because we've got no crops. But you know why they can't pay their way? And this is a crime against the people. They are still being charged by the New South Wales state water authorities for water they are not getting. They've been charged for that water now since 2002. The New South Wales state water authorities exacted from irrigators 15% of their water entitlement in 2002. They did it on the basis that it was just for while the drought was on. Now stop and think about, first of all, how stupid this is. The water they exacted was all owned by the state anyway, but they exacted it and took it off irrigators. So they couldn't, when there was an allocation made, instead of, if they had 100 megalitres of water, from that day on, they only had 85 megalitres of water. But then, because they weren't selling any water, or not selling much, they introduced a delivery charge. Now that delivery charge was charged on your water entitlement, regardless of whether you got the water or not. But guess what? They also levied that charge on the water that had been exacted. Now, in my opinion, the New South Wales Minister for Water and the Premier should be in court charged with extortion. Because if that's not extortion, I've never heard of it. But that's what's going on in New South Wales. When this woman rang me who I've known since she was born and knew her mother and dad very, very well. She said, Ron, we can't go on. We've got no income, but we're still up for all this money to give to the New South Wales state government for a product that they cannot deliver. Closing on that note, if that's not abuse of power, I don't know what is.
That seems to me like the final kick in the teeth, or a punch in the guts, or a middle finger. That's after going through all that they've gone through, the government to say, pay up, that's abhorrent.
Well, that's what's going on in New South Wales. To a lesser extent, it's happening in other areas. But in New South Wales, that's been going on now for 16 or 17 years. And a class action against the government, I think, would romp in.
Well, like I said, I've appreciated your time. We could probably, if we wanted to do a full kangaroo court, we'd probably be going for hours and hours. But we'll leave it at that tonight. But if there's any further developments, I'd love to have you back on.
Tim, I thank you very much for the opportunity. We have to persist with this, and we have to get it right. And if I could conclude by just saying, please, Prime Minister, and please, Premier, just let's sit down and talk about this. We can fix it. But you cannot go on denying people access to what is their basic rights.
Too right. All right, take care.
Thanks, Tim. All the best.
Thanks. So, yeah, like I said, I got a bit emotional myself, just that our governments and those who think they know how to take care of the environment and water would do this, and the fact that our nation seems to be self-destructing in the 21st century, it's vile. And I know that we're told to be optimistic in the future, but how can you be after hearing that, not just about water, but energy and manufacturing? Just so much of our economy is just deteriorating. So it's quite a down note to finish the week, but we are realists here at the Unshackled, and I hope that you yourself are inspired to take action. Maybe send in a letter to your local MP, and make sure that this episode gets out to as many of your friends and family to open your eyes. I made sure that did a pretty comprehensive summary of how this is a self-inflicted drought. But that concludes WilmsFront for this week, and also the Australian alt media schedule prime time. Of course, you can catch up on WilmsFront now on your favourite podcasting platforms. There is Apple Podcasts, there is Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and Spotify. The archive of episodes, so where this was number 13 tonight, you can go to timwilms.com. Of course, coming up on Sunday night, there should be another episode of WilmsFront and another Dear Beltran live debate over on her YouTube channel. Then on Monday night, it's XYZ Live at 9 p.m. Melbourne time on the Maddie Rose YouTube channel. There is, of course, most weekday mornings Detonation episodes broadcast live by my colleague Steele Archer. That's now on its dedicated YouTube channel. So that's most weekday mornings Australian time with a few primetime specials. Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Melbourne time on the Unshackled main channel. That's when I host a Trans-Tasman talk with my New Zealand counterpart, the editor of Right Minds, Duer de Boer. Wednesday night is another episode of WilmsFront at 7 p.m. Melbourne time, followed by Dear Beltran's weekly live stream at 8:15 p.m. Melbourne time. And then, of course, the centerpiece of the Australian alt media lineup is the Uncockables over on the Uncockables YouTube channel, which is every Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time. You can see the archive at theuncockables.com, and it's also on your favorite podcasting platform. over on the Unshackled main channel, apart from Trans Tasman Talk, I'm still uploading segments from WilmsFront in more digestible forms, and there is also the occasional report from Tiger Mountain with Richard Wollstonecroft. Make sure now, because YouTube, it's definitely playing tricks on all of us here on the alt media, that you are subscribed to the channel, you click the bell to allow notifications so that you know when we go live, and also make sure you give a thumbs up to these episodes and leave a comment below, because that all helps us fight the algorithmic manipulations that YouTube tries to play. Of course, I cannot do WilmsFront, and the Unshackled and the rest of the alt media cannot continue this production schedule without your support. At the Unshackled, we have a membership program at the unshackled.net/membership. There's also a web donation form at the unshackled.net/donate. We're, of course, on all the crowdfunding platforms, patreon.com/theunshackled, subscribestar.com/theunshackled, and paypal.me/theunshackled. And there's also our online store at theunshackled.net/store. Of course, YouTube, not only do they try to hide our content, but, well, in the end, they could completely delete our content, or get nuked, as it's called. So we do have a free speech self-hosted video platform, rationalrise.tv, which is run by James Fox Higgins of the Rational Rise, which hosts Unshackled content, XYZ content. We'll also add Dia Beltran and the Dusty Bogan. Make sure that you follow myself on social media. I'm still on the established social media, facebook.com/WilmsFront and twitter.com/WilmsFront. I'm, of course, on free speech social media at gab.com/Tim Wilms. That's probably my favorite free speech social media platform. And, of course, minds.com/Tim Wilms. All right, that concludes for the week. Please enjoy your weekend, but make sure you still continue to spread the word and keep up the fight. And I will see you again in some form on Sunday. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.